Imagine you're a Roman soldier. You've fought in many battles and have seen your fair share of danger. But as you approach the enemy wall on your ship, you can't help feeling a sense of unease. This is a crucial moment, and the success of the attack depends on your ship and its crew. You take a deep breath and steel yourself for what's to come, when suddenly you hear a loud creaking sound, and the ship begins to tilt violently. Panic sets in as you realize what's happening, or actually don't have any idea what's happening, because a giant metal claw has just struck your vessel. The ingenious weapon has reached out from the enemy wall and grabbed hold of your ship's hull, causing it to capsize. How could you have seen that coming? Well, in the past, you had to be ready for anything. Sometimes fact can be stranger than fiction, and it's these outlandish strategies we'll be exploring today. From launching dead bodies over walls, setting pigs on fire, or constructing giant mechanical claws, we'll discover all kinds of delightfully devious tactics that sound made up, but really happened in this episode of History Unveiled. One-on-one combat. Let's start things off simple. It's you against an opponent, sword to sword in a classic duel. Usually the favor would fall to which one of you was the most technically skilled and practiced in sword fighting. But can you honestly know for sure that you were the more skilled warrior here? If only you had a way to surprise your opponent with some underhanded techniques, it could well be worth the risk. These sorts of tactics were not only used, but also documented in books and manuscripts. Fiore dei Liberi, a 14th century knight, diplomat, and fencing master, wrote in his manuscripts of how he would be able to defend himself should his opponent throw their sword at him, implying that this is something somebody might actually do. Of course, throwing your weapon away might not seem like the most sensible strategy, but if your opponent was lightly armored, it might actually work. Why get into dangerous blade-to-blade combat when you can keep your distance and injure your foe from afar? And you can bet they wouldn't be expecting that. Of course, if your enemy is wearing heavy armor, you might need a different approach. Perhaps your blade just won't cut it, no pun intended. So what do? Well, in the German school of swordsmanship in the early 15th century, we see teachings of the Mordhau, the murder stroke. This was a half-sword technique where you would grab your sword by the blade and swing the pommel of the weapon at the enemy like a hammer. I'd recommend gloves when trying this out, but as the name implies, it clearly was a deadly, if not unorthodox method of attack. Another technique shown in multiple manuscripts was a double-leg takedown. Here, the writings suggest you raise your sword high as if to strike, but instead drop your sword down behind your head, lean down, and tackle your opponent to the floor before they realize what's happening. From there, you're free to overwhelm your enemy with brute force, because no fancy footwork will help you when you're lying on your back. Now that's some dirty fighting. Ending sieges. On the wider battlefield, when your enemy has an army and are well defended behind towering castle walls, the most common practice was to siege the stronghold. By trapping and starving those you wished to conquer, you had a pretty good chance of success. However, these sieges could take weeks, months, or even years in some cases, and could often become more of a hindrance than a great victory. It should be no surprise then that many commanders tried everything they could to bring the battle to the conclusion they wanted. When it came to possibly breaking the siege, nothing was off limits, not even the dead. One strategy that was used throughout history was making use of dead bodies as weapons. Attacking an enemy's health, both mental and physical, was a particularly cruel but often effective way to break the defender's morale. Contaminating water supplies with both animal and human corpses was a strategy often employed, rendering many soldiers unable to defend themselves. For a more gruesome display, sometimes human corpses were loaded into catapults, either whole or dismembered, I'm not sure which is worse, with the intent of demoralizing those behind the walls. Worst of all, in some cases, infected bodies were launched from catapults with the aim of spreading disease and illness through the ranks, as was done at the Siege of Kaffa when the Mongol forces spread the Black Death into Europe. The story of the Trojan horse is a well-known and popular myth when looking back at sieges of old, but one equally sneaky tactic actually was used. On the 19th of February 1313, the forces of Sir James Douglas devised a plan to quickly take the English-held castle of Roxburgh. 60 of his best men would wear black cloaks and cowhide to disguise themselves in the fields at night. There, pretending to be cattle, and perhaps with the occasional moo, the men moved slowly towards the castle walls equipped with rope ladders. If any of the English guards saw them, they must have fallen for the deception because the plan worked, and Douglas's men were able to fight their way over the wall and open the castle gates from the inside, allowing the rest of the army to launch a full assault on the castle. A move I think we can all agree was utterly impressive. During the First Barons' War of 1215 to 1217 in the city of Rochester, King John and his forces were having difficulty securing the enemy castle. They had breached and taken the outer walls but could make no further progress into the castle keep. After trying every usual option of force, diplomacy and bribery, the king eventually gave the order for
40 of the fattest pigs, the sort least good for eating.
The plan was to bury the pigs underneath the foundations of the keep and burn them. The plan worked as the intense heat of the pig fat collapsed one corner of the keep and gave the king's forces the entry they needed. Now that's what I call a hog roast. And while on the subject of burning swine, I think it's worth mentioning that setting pigs on fire has also been used in a defensive manner. Way back during the Siege of Megara in 266 BC, the Macedonian king's forces were making use of their war elephants to smash aside any resistance. The Megarians covered their pigs in combustible pitch, oil and resin, and set the poor things alight and loose amongst these massive opponents. The burning pigs panicked and squealed around the elephants, which in turn scared them and caused the Macedonians to lose control of their giant beasts, and thus breaking the siege of the city. Animals used during sieges came in all sizes, even as small as insects. During a Viking attack at Chester in the 10th century, the defenders had been getting creative. The Vikings often adopted the use of wooden coverings called hurdles to protect themselves when attacking a wall. But the people of Chester were throwing boiling beer down at them, which would seep through the gaps and burn the Vikings beneath. The Vikings were no fools, however, and began covering their hurdles in animal hide to protect them from burning liquids. Unfortunately for them, they had no way of defending themselves from bees. That's right, the defender of Chester resorted to throwing beehives at the Vikings, and once those hives broke, the bees were furious, and the Vikings had no choice but to turn and run. Now, if you're enjoying the video so far and would like to see more, please do hit the like and subscribe button down below. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it means you get to see more videos on incredible moments like these right here on History Unveiled. Super weapons. When talking about so-called superweapons, your mind might go to more modern inventions of destruction, with incredible power such as nuclear bombs, napalm, or super-heavy tanks and warships. But if we look back further in the past, however, we can find examples of superweapons going back 2,000 years. While many weapons from these ancient designs are only fantasy, some were very real and left a big mark on history, and on those struck by them. One such example, seen as a kind of naval superweapon of its day, was known as Greek fire, a liquid mix that would catch fire on contact with water. Being able to set fire to the seas might sound quite mythical, but this technology helped keep the Byzantine Empire secure for over 7 centuries. For hundreds of years, many enemies of the empire would succumb to the terrible flames bursting across their ships. The substance used to spread fire across the waves was such a closely guarded secret, passed on from emperor to emperor that even today we can only make educated guesses as to what it was made from. But the impact it had on history is undeniable. Even the Romans would run into their own naval problems back in 214 BC when they tried to attack the city of Syracuse on the coast of Sicily. With a fleet of 60 ships, the Romans attempted an amphibious assault on the seaward portion of the city walls. What they were blissfully unaware of was that the Syracusans had built the Claw of Archimedes, a giant metal claw designed to grab and capsize ships near the walls. The Syracusans were able to pull ships up out of the water and destroy them. By using these giant claws, probably with less lights and music than you'd find in the arcades, the defenders were able to throw the Roman attack into disarray, forcing them to retreat and securing their coastal borders. That Archimedes sure was a bright fellow. So, as you can see, the past was full of all kinds of wonderful and often grisly inventions and tactics, when the only things that mattered in the minds of the rulers was victory and not morality. The kinds of thinking that you just wouldn't get today with all these rules and sensible logic and progress. Bring back the old times. Now, if you want to find more videos like this, then check out the rest of the channel and hit that subscribe button to see what comes next and discover more of History Unveiled.